Have you ever seen all of the people in your town just vanish into thin air? Probably not. But this is exactly what happened in the chilling Alaskan mystery we're covering today. It was 1968, and 3/4 of a century had passed since gold prospectors first settled the small village of Arklon, Alaska. At the time, the town only had around 20 residents who lived there year-round, with many more joining them during the summer to work at the local cannery or the mines. They were an isolated bunch for sure, but they weren't alone. All across the vast state of Alaska, there were other small settlements of hardy Alaskans who carved out lives for themselves as prospectors. Hunters and fishers living mostly off the land and often not seeing another soul for weeks at a time. It was tough, isolating frontier living, but these folks wouldn't have traded it for the world. But everything changed one day when the residents of Arklon, Alaska woke up to find that every single person in the surrounding area had disappeared. If you're wondering what could have possibly caused such a mass disappearance, keep watching. All will be revealed. In late August of 1968, 2 miners from the nearby town of Ruby, Alaska, named Jeb Stewart and John Schiltz, got into their plane and flew over to Arklon to visit some friends. They arrived around lunchtime and went straight to the local tavern, where they hoped to meet up with some buddies. But much to their surprise, the place was completely empty. The miners found this odd, but figured that maybe everyone had gone down to the river to do some fishing, so they headed down there too. But the riverbank was deserted too. The miners even walked up and down the beach, calling out to see if anyone was there, but no one answered. They returned to the tavern, sat down, and ordered themselves a couple of beers. And then the full horror of the situation smacked them right in the face. There was food on the table in front of them, half-eaten sandwiches and glasses of milk on the windowsill. A dog bowl filled with kibble sat in the corner. And outside, a truck was parked beside a house, with its engine still running, its lunch pail sitting on the seat and the front door wide open. It was as though everyone had just dropped everything and left in a hurry. So the miners did what any rational people would do: called the police and told them about the strange events they had just witnessed. But the officers they spoke with didn't seem to take them seriously. You see, this wasn't the first time something like this had happened in Alaska. Back in 1948, a prospector named Harry Laughlin had made a similar report after he'd deflown over to the town of Teller, Alaska, and found it completely abandoned. Like Arklon, everything was left exactly as it had been the day before. Food was on the tables, tools were in the workshops, clothes were scattered about as if the townspeople had just run out of their homes in a mad dash. When the police searched the town, they found nothing. They questioned the locals and learned that the same thing had happened there for days earlier. The cops eventually determined that Harry's story was most likely true. But they never did figure out what had caused the town's sudden evacuation. The case of the missing town quickly faded into obscurity and was eventually forgotten about entirely. The 2 miners were disappointed that the police seemed so unconcerned about the missing townspeople, but they had to admit that it probably wasn't anything they could do anyway, so they left Arklon and tried to put the whole thing out of their minds. But upon arriving back at their own town, they heard some disturbing news. It turned out that several people from Ruby, including the chief of police, had also vanished without a trace. When the miners reported what they had seen in Arklon, they had left behind a list of the names of everyone who was supposed to be there. And now it seemed that those people were missing too. In fact, over the past few months, quite a few people throughout the entire region had vanished. You might be wondering why the authorities hadn't done anything about the disappearances up until this point. Well, it was because each case was so far removed from the others geographically that they were written off as simple missing persons cases. But now that multiple people from different towns had disappeared, the authorities finally began taking the cases seriously. The police conducted extensive searches of all the towns where people had gone missing, but they came up empty-handed. With no new leads in the case, the investigation quickly stalled again, and the whole thing was once more forgotten about. The problem was that this time, unlike in 1948, people weren't just disappearing from small towns. Now, big cities were seeing people go missing too. On December 1968, 8 people vanished from Anchorage, Alaska. And in January of 1969, 6 people from Sitka, 3 men and 3 women, simply ceased to exist. They were gone without a trace. All the while, the Alaskan towns of Arklon, Ruby, and Teller remained abandoned, empty, and eerily silent. What on earth could have caused so many people to leave their homes and never return? Was it a mass migration, an alien invasion, or something else entirely? As the years passed, theories about the disappearances ran rampant. Some believed that the missing people had all joined a cult and moved to a remote location in the wilderness. Others thought that a disease had broken out and killed everyone. Still others claimed that a group of killers had come through and murdered everyone in the towns before dumping their bodies in the rivers or the sea. However, in 2019, almost 50 years after the mysterious events of 1968, we finally got an answer. Researchers were able to analyze some of the food left behind in the deserted towns and discovered traces of a chemical called cytinin. Cytinin is a chemical compound that gives pufferfish their poisonous properties. And scientists believe that the people of Arkland, Alaska, may have accidentally poisoned themselves after mistaking toxic pufferfish for the much tastier Arctic cod. But if that's the case, why did the poison only affect the people in these isolated towns and not the rest of the population? After all, everyone in Alaska eats fish, right? Well, it turns out that prior to the mysterious deaths, there had been an unusually high number of earthquakes in the area. These earthquakes had caused a shift in the tectonic plates, which resulted in an upwelling of deep-sea fish, including pufferfish. That's why the fish was so plentiful in the rivers and on the beaches. People who ate the fish were immediately poisoned and killed. This may explain why there was food on the table in the deserted homes, and why the people didn't have any time to escape the towns. They were simply poisoned to death where they sat. Of course, this theory doesn't explain why everyone in the surrounding areas also disappeared. But scientists believe that those people probably died the same way. They just had more time to get away. Now go watch. All of humanity will die when the sun goes out, or click this other video instead.